Light Protocol. How did the name come around, Light Protocol?
It's sort of all about the sort of positioning the brand of Light Protocol. So right now, if you look at Ethereum and other chains, if you hear about privacy, it sort of has this shady connotation where you think of Tornado, you think of exploits, hacks, and money laundering. And that's really not what privacy is really about, right? Like, what we're trying to figure out with Solana and what this core team is sort of relentlessly pushing towards is mainstream adoption. And so if you think about sort of the average mainstream finance user, right? Like if they look at traditional finance, what they expect is sort of the bank privacy that they have right now, right? So when they go into DeFi and sort of, you know, you have the average mainstream user, they try out this new app and it's like super user friendly. And then they have to realize that everything they do is publicly traceable. Their whole financial history, what they bought, you know, if they go to Starbucks and they pay with Solana Pay at some point, they can be traced and it's a public ledger. And that's, you know, transparency is really what public ledgers are based on. So the question is, how do you introduce privacy sort of on top of those layer ones like Solana, and how do you protect those users from, you know, being exposed, the financial history being exposed? And so that's where zero knowledge comes into play, and we're basically applying zero knowledge, and can talk about that in a little bit, what that is. We use that to sort of break the on-chain link between transactions, senders and recipients, to sort of give the end user that, you know, privacy feeling that I have from banks, that I get from banks. So that's sort of the and then you know, the long explanation for where the name comes from. Light Protocol is the opposite of dark, and so we really try to brand as sort of this friendly, trustworthy experience, right? And we're building infrastructure, so, you know, most users at some point will not even know what Light does, hopefully, right? It's going to be a little bit maybe like SSL or HTTPS, but it's still going to be that, you know, for the partners that we're working with right now and the partners that we're going to work with in the future, they really value sort of a clean brand, some, you know, enabling the mainstream use cases and not really enabling the illicit use cases. So that's why the name Light Protocol. So to get started, I really want to, and it's great to see those friendly faces here, because I think it's a really great sort of experience being at those 1 month hacker houses. I remember back in the day, there was in America, in Salt Lake City, there was a 1 month hacker house. There was sort of like this self-organized thing back in February. And it was a really good experience for us as a team to grow, to raise funds. And so I hope that sort of, you know, this sort of follows in the footsteps, and that you guys have a great experience like coding here, meeting new people, designing stuff and building your projects. So yeah, that's really cool, and thanks for the invitation to sort of host a little workshop here. Yeah. So what I want to get sort of just to gauge what this workshop will look like, I'll try to really base it on you guys, right? Like, how many engineers do we have in the room right now listening? Raise a hand. Okay. Okay, so about half. So who of you all like are currently like working on a project and sort of in the scope of the Solana hackathon, the summer camp hackathon? Raise a hand. Okay, so a little bit less. Interesting. So I mean, it really depends on you all. We have sort of this super simple one-line integration that I kind of sort of showcase, right? So it's like, this is for developers, but it might sort of also be interesting for you all to see the end product. And you know, I'm sort of sensing that it would probably make more sense to sort of skip the whole like nitty-gritty coding details, and maybe talk a little bit more about the high-level concepts, the breakdown, why is privacy important, sort of show you also what Light Protocol does. I think this is the way to go. And then we can sort of wrap it up with like an open discussion. I'm really happy to talk and discuss like different topics, but also especially privacy, zero knowledge, if you have questions there as well. Does that sound good?
Yeah. LFG.
LFG, cool. All right, let me try and set up this. Is the sound system also connected to it?
You want some sound too?
Yeah, I would. Does that work?
Let me get you some sound, yeah.
Could also try and like move the microphone to.
Is this long enough?
Yeah, we can make it work.
That's all I can get. There you go, beautiful.
Apologies.
Perfect.
Yeah,
That's the other side. Okay, I'll pull this over here. Yeah, we're really just YOLOing this, so. Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Let's see.
Oh, you need to adjust your displays. You want to mirror it, or you want a new display?
Yeah, I'm gonna mirror it. Just have to figure
Yeah.
out. Here we go.
Stand by for technical difficulties.
Let's figure it out. Awesome. Are we gonna have a problem with like double?
No, you're not
no?
going to have a problem. Can you make it bigger? Yeah.
Okay, cool, awesome. So, what I want to show you. What I want to.
Let me put a mic in your face.
No, that's awesome.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Chipping.
Okay. So, sorry for this distraction on YouTube. It's a video that one of our partners, DJ Ape Academy, they integrated Light for private checkout. They had this bear market drop a while back in June, and they integrated Light protocol. And I'm just going to show you that. Just before that, I briefly want to touch on sort of why privacy, right? Like we had it a little bit in the beginning, but one question I have is like, how many of you have used DeFi on Solana in the last, let's say, 30 days?
Like swap coins?
Swap coins, yield farm. Okay, so three of you. So cool. Rob, what about you? So if I want to send you some Sol now, let's say I want to send you some money, would you just give me a wallet address?
Yeah, I would.
You would. Okay, that's great. So you sort of trust me already. That's amazing. One problem that we'll sort of soon encounter is that when he gives me his wallet address, is I have access to all his past transactions that happen with that wallet address, and I will also continue to have access to that for forever. So when he decides to use my incoming funds and send them to his main wallet or to another address on chain in a decentralized manner, then I will have access to that too. Right, so that's where this whole problem starts. That's where you see that privacy is really, really, really important if we actually want to do and facilitate peer-to-peer transactions. So that's sort of the scope of privacy, and then the question becomes really like, why is there no privacy right now? Right, like why is Solana not private? Why do people not implement it? And the answer to that is really complicated. But like there's two simplifications. One is, well, first of all, people are already trying for a long time. There was sort of the OGs like Monero and Zcash, sort of privacy coins, forks of Bitcoin that tried to implement zero-knowledge proofs, which is this fancy mathematical thing that I'm going to talk about soon, to make transactions private. And the second part of this question is, well, all these attempts at making private transfers and making normal blockchain transactions private have one big problem in common, is that they're not user-friendly enough, okay? So, and there are various reasons for that. Some could include cost of transaction, others could be how long does it take. Another could be, well, maybe there are just 10 different factors that count into how privacy is achieved actually, and you have to be very careful if you use a privacy solution to actually not dox yourself, which makes sort of, if you dox yourself, that renders your whole use of the privacy application really useless. And then there's other issues as well, like if you have something like Zcash, you can't use it on Solana, right? And so the users are on Solana, but Solana is a public ledger, just regular public. And so we don't have privacy right now because it's just really, really, really hard to build privacy on top of a public ledger. And this is where ZK comes into place. Who of you has, before today, has heard about ZK and zero knowledge? Cool, okay, also about half of the room. So zero knowledge is really, really interesting, and personally I think if you want to sort of look into getting into the space as well, and like maybe think about what's going to be really, really important and useful in the next 3 to 4 years, privacy is going to be interesting in my opinion. I might be a little bit biased, but ZK is, in my opinion, one of the major things that you're going to see, right? So maybe last year it was DeFi or NFTs. Maybe in 3 to 4 years it's going to be zero knowledge stuff. And here's why. So basically, zero knowledge means you can prove something to someone else without actually revealing anything about what you're proving. You're just saying X statement is true without actually having to reveal why it is true, right? So, and there's like complex mathematical equations that come into play if you actually want to look under the hood how it works. But on a high level, to give you sort of this really tangible experience is you all have done it before. You've used Phantom, you've used your wallets, and you've probably signed transactions with it. And what you did by signing that transaction and executing it is you've completed a zero knowledge proof. And it's been verified by the Solana runtime, for instance, because what you did is you proved that you have ownership over funds with your signature without actually revealing your private key. So apps, and this is a little bit mind-boggling, but if you think about it, that's the most basic zero-knowledge proof that you can get, sort of, right? Which is really fascinating because those signatures really allow us to use applications without sharing our private key with them. And so this is where the power of zero-knowledge really starts, right? And then basically what we've done with Light Protocol is we've used a little bit more complex zero-knowledge proofs, and we've encoded proofs in so-called ZK snarks, which is like this very fancy acronym that stands for basically succinct proofs, which basically have the feature that you can write proof statements that can be overly complex, but the actual proof verification will be sort of at a fixed cost, a computation cost, right? So this is really interesting because you can prove a lot of different things, and we're proving basic movement of funds. So I have this little like things in our docs, and there's this picture. I'm gonna make it a little bigger. Can you guys see it? Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So what you see is, and this is the most fundamental process in how we achieve privacy on the program side, right? We abstract all of this away in our SDKs, but on the program level, it's really fairly simple. Instead of sending a Solana transfer, right? Just a basic transfer, we're actually sort of interacting with the Light program, which is a smart contract on the Solana runtime. And there are a lot of errors, but I'll try to simplify it. Basically what you do is, instead of sending a SOL transfer, you're speaking with that program, and you're sending a proof. You're generating in a client, in your browser, in your mobile app, you're generating a proof that is this, fancy magical zero-knowledge ZK snark proof. And in the end, that's bytes, right? You can send that along. And you basically send those bytes into the program, right? And you can do this directly or through a relayer. And I'll explain what the relayer does and what it's useful for in a little bit. But essentially, you're sending those proof data to the program. The program verifies the data. And then based on what the proof says, like you have a lot of private inputs that you can put into the proof, like where should the money go, and like how much do I want to spend. It verifies that proof, And then it's able to move funds based on what the proof says, without actually on-chain showing that that who's sending the funds, or who is the recipient actually, depending on if you deposit into the pool, into the program, or withdraw out of the program. So basically what it means is you're sending funds into the program. We call it shielding. And you can also send funds out of the program, and you can do fully encrypted transactions just inside the program. And how that works is, it's basically, let's go for one example. I decided to put funds into the program. Let's imagine I have funds in the program, which is just a normal account that is owned by the program. And now I want to go and I want to send those funds, that we call them shielded funds. I'm sending those funds to a recipient, but I want the program to actually release those funds from my shielded balance without me being involved in it in any way. So what I do is, I have I have a certain ownership note, like a $1 bill in a way, right, or like a promissory note, and I use that note to create a proof on the client. This proof says, send X amount of tokens, let's say 1 Sol, from my shielded balance to a specified recipient, right? And this is all created in this proof, and it's all private inputs, right? So no one sees the data actually, just myself, the client. And I sent this proof to the relayer. The relayer then takes that proof, doesn't do anything with it, just awesome, cool, yeah, this works. You all can hear me now? Okay, great. Awesome. So this is really the basic process, and now you can use this. Basically, all you have to take away from this long explanation is, instead of making a sole transfer, I can interact with the program. I prove that I have ownership over funds in the program, that I deposited prior in the exact same manner. And I can use those funds, spend them without actually being involved in the transaction on the blockchain. So that's really the core of it all, right? So this is the core of Light Protocol. This is all open source. I'm happy to share the link as well to the GitHub repo. And what we've done now is we've built SDKs on top, right? So one example is, and I want to show you that, is a so-called widget. So it's like a hosted widget instance that pops up when you call it. It's like a one-call, API call integration. And you can use it to spend those shielded balances that users have, for instance. And so what BarrelDAO did is they did exactly that for the Degen Ape Academy beer market, which is like this e-commerce store built on Shopify. It's like super custom. And at checkout, they have the option to pay privately, so that the purchaser's delivery address is not really connected to a public key.
Information. And let's go ahead and click here. Instead of pay with Solana, pay with Light Protocol. And then here we can go ahead and, there we go, select our Solana Phantom wallet and go ahead and click pay privately. Looks like my Loom thing switched to this widget, but all right. So approve. And then we're going to wait a little bit, and we're going to see that again. The unshield takes 30 seconds. And then after this is completed, we should be able to leave the page, and the rest of the validation for the unshield will happen in the background. And in a few minutes, our funds will be officially delivered to the store wallet. So let's wait for the widget. There we go. Awesome. And we saw that that the order was completed here. My information is exposed. Oh, well. And yeah, there we go. All right, there we go. Our order is completed. Our private transaction has been sent. And we're ready to receive our viewers.
All right, so this is what you just saw was sort of basically what they did. And they did a little bit more because they had this private, this custom Shopify store. So they had to fiddle a bit around. But in essence, this widget is like a one function call, right? And basically, you can call this one function in your dApp. You don't need to do any fancy stuff. You don't need to know about privacy so much. Just have to call a function, opens up the widget, and then you can use it, pass in the recipient, for instance, the amount you want to send, and then you can use that as a replacement for, let's say, pay with Phantom, right? And then the major difference is that when you look at the chain, is the transaction actually comes from the program, and the actual owner of the funds, the public key that shielded them in the beginning, is nowhere to be found. So that's the core concept, and that's what we're what a couple of projects right now, I believe also in this hackathon, are building with. And there's a couple of really interesting news coming up in the next couple of weeks and months. So that's one part. We also, another abstraction, and that's what I'm personally really excited about, is if you think about like, okay, how can you take this user experience and like get it to another level, is you think about wallets, right? So if a wallet has access to this whole, to the SDK and can manage those private funds, like you could essentially recreate an experience that feels just like a regular wallet experience like that you have right now with Phantom, right? And so yeah, excited to sort of push that forward. So yeah, there's a couple of, we really want to build this sort of privacy rails sort of platform that you can utilize different SDKs. You can even build your own SDKs, wrap them around the program, and then do anything with privacy. And so that's basically what Light Protocol does right now. We can also, if you're all interested, we can also take a quick glimpse at the code that would be involved in integrating it. We can also do this sort of in a separate session for those of you who want to sort of come closer, and we can look at it if you're interested in exploring that for your own projects in the hackathon. Happy to, I'm going to stay around for at least another hour after this. And at this point I would really, I guess, already want to open this up to sort of like an open discussion or debate. If you guys want to, maybe opinions, questions about privacy, maybe if you're interested in how this all works under the hood, happy to discuss this now.
Do you have an example transaction that you can show on chain, what it looks like?
Sure, yeah. So the whole thing is live on mainnet. We also have this custom, like we have an interface as well. You don't have to move through SDKs. You also have an interface. It's, you can find it on shield.lightprotocol.com. And before I shield, I can just show you, wait, there's this little button up on the top left. It's called Activity.
Bigger on the screen.
Thanks. Will do. Is this good?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so what we have here. So this is basically the account that moves the funds, right? And as you can see right now, there is a balance of 380 shielded SOL, right? So that's basically the balance of all users combined that are in the pool right now. People that shielded into the pool but haven't used those funds yet. So if you look at the transaction history, there's one from 1 hour ago. Let's just take that one and look at it, right? I can sort of signify what's going on here. If you look at this transaction, what you see is you see a bunch of, first of all, you see that this is not a regular Solana transfer. This is a program instruction. So it interacts with our program. And you also see a lot of accounts being passed around. And you also see a lot of balances change. So let's see what's going on here, right? So the first account always, if you look at the Explorer on Solana, is always a signer, right? So this is the account that pays for the fees. And this is actually our relayer. That's where the relayer comes into play. You've seen it in the picture. Basically, this is the web server that takes the proof that the client sent to them, packs them into a transaction and interacts with the program. And the cool thing is that the relayer in return gets a little fee. And this fee is determined by the program and by the proof, right? So the relayer cannot take the proof, alter it, and do some weird stuff with it. If they do that, then the verification on chain fails, right? So that's how we ensure that the Sol system is trustless. And so this relay is sending the transaction, and you can see that in return it gets a little fee of 0.0245 SOL. 46, rounded up. And what else? So the other interesting party involved here is number 6, CJQS. This is actually the recipient. So basically what happened in this transaction is someone unshielded SOL, maybe to spend it, maybe to just fund a new burner wallet to sweep some NFTs. That's what we see a lot of people doing. And this is the recipient address. We can also take a look at it, but this is 1.265 SOL that they unshielded from the program into this new address. And that's essentially now an account that here we go. That's essentially an account that is now funded without actually revealing the source of the funds. And basically, what we can see here as well. So now I think they used this address by now, and you see it basically has barely any address, and it's also an account. So that's interesting. It's an initiated account, so we don't know what this user used that for, but we can see that basically it was funded without any trace. So let's go back to this sort of list of accounts that is here. So we know that number 6 is the recipient from the unshielding, and you can also see who sends the SOL to the recipient. It's account number 10. And account number 10 is the program. So it's the account that's owned by the program. HXY, and here you can see the balance 378. That's again, that's the ones that's currently in the shielded pool, and you can see that this program is funding the recipient with the exact amount there. And the magic is really there's it's trustless. It's but you don't have a signer that's clearly responsible for it because this CZ is the relay, it's not the end user. And then as part of the integrity of this whole process, there are a couple of other accounts that are created. So you can see specifically 3 accounts that are being created. You can see it with the green balance changes. And those basically make sure that you cannot spend your funds twice, right? So like the typical double spend. Basically, when you spend your funds, what you do is you redeem your promissory note that you got when you shielded the funds. And the so-called nullifiers of that note are being inserted as PDAs, as program-derived addresses right here. And so those are stored on chain, and the transaction was successful, so they cannot be altered as well. And that's how we sort of maintain the integrity of this whole process as well. So that's what the transaction looks like on chain.
Is it possible to time match so when I submit some transaction on the relayer has a transaction, and then that relayer gives the transaction over to the pool, and then the pool executes it, right? Is it possible to like time match the transactions, or is it a complete cut in between somehow? Like if I were to go, like there has to be somewhere where I'm the guy that is initiating this transaction, but like where is it completely cut between I'm the guy initiating it and this is the guy receiving it? Like right. Where is that there it's completely cut in between?
Cool. Yeah. So basically what you have is that when you're sending the proof to the relayer that you want to spend some SOL from the private balance, what you're doing is you're sending the data. You're not sending your public key, you're not sending any information, just the data. So what the relayer receives is potentially your IP address of your computer. So that's where you have a link basically that links back to someone sent a had me as a relayer initialize a transaction, and this is the IP address, right? So we don't do IP address sort of obfuscation. We might partner with some of those. There are some projects that do that specifically. We might partner with those. What we're sort of focusing on is on-chain privacy, right? So the sort of in the beginning is really like the bank privacy, right? So no one, not your neighbor, should have sort of this access to it. Yeah. But IP levels, security and privacy is something else. Okay.
Oh yeah, sure. Would there be a way to infer from, like, do you change the balance on either side? Like how much is, if it's like 1.274995 going in and then coming out on the other side exactly, is there a way to, like, is that a kind of a way to dox yourself on it a bit, or?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so right now what we have with this interface is you are allowed as a user, you can do anything. And what you can do is essentially you could go send in 0.42 Sol and then 1 minute later unshield it 0.42 Sol into a new address. You don't have a direct link on chain, but you obviously could infer, if people actually look at the program and the interactions, they could infer that this is very likely that actor, especially if there are no other transactions happening at that time, or in sort of a similar denomination. So right now in this state, it sort of requires that you sort of be patient and that you look at the actual Explorer and look what the state is, right? So that's one big sort of problem field or sort of challenge that we as contributors face, and what we're sort of trying to solve in the near term and in the midterm in different ways is how can we make sure that users use the protocol safely, right? So I think with wallets, that's going to be really interesting because essentially, well, we have a way, I can't talk too much about it right now, but we have a way in which we can mitigate a lot of these problems by sort of making sure that users are sort of nudged into the right direction. And then, there are other ways you could build sort of an interface that shows you, hey, this is, maybe here's a warning sign, you should wait a couple of hours or things like that. So, yeah, this is a really good point, right? Like, this is one of the core attack vectors to privacy in the end. There is another angle to this, which is, I showed two actions, which was shielding and unshielding, right? So that's where you have this interaction with Solana, normal Solana wallet addresses, and that's where you potentially leak some information about yourself on chain. But there's a third type, which is fully encrypted transfers. And this is really what we hope to see in the future as sort of the majority of all transactions, is if we both, you, Rob, and I, we both have a light account or address, let's say in a wallet, and I send you some private transfer, I send you some Sol or USDC privately. This would be entirely encrypted in a way where it's not going to your Solana address, but it's going to your actual light shielded address. So what you would then see is nothing at all. All you would see is some bytes flipping in an account in the state of the program, but you wouldn't be able to infer at all what's happening really and who's doing what. So that's where we sort of see the long-term game with where sort of there's no information leakage at all.
Can I ask one more?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is the way it's implemented on Solana like meaningfully different from Tornado Cash? Like, or what would be some of the differences?
Good question. So, Tornado Cash, the original Tornado Cash, is quite different. It also, if you look at the interface, it uses fixed denominations, and it's a bit less flexible, right? You can just, it's not really a pool. It's really just a collection of the same nodes, same denominations. You would have to send them one Sol, 1 ETH or 10 ETH or 1,000 ETH, and then you could withdraw exact that amount. But you can't go and like break up nodes and like be like, oh, I'm sending in 1 Sol. Now I have a note, promissory note for 1 Sol, and then I want to go and send you 0.4 and keep 0.6, right? You can't do that. Split those promissory notes in Tornado Cash. Now, the Tornado team built a new version recently that's called Tornado Nova, and that's pretty much the same thing, right? Like on the technical level, both of these solutions, Light Protocol and Tornado Nova, are based, are sort of inspired from by Zcash, which has always been a shielded pool, just works exactly the same way on a ZK or technical level, uses the same ZK tech as well. The biggest challenge for us really was making those ZK snark verifications run on the Solana runtime, because if you try to build Solana programs that have like really strict limitations on how much bytes you can send, how many bytes you can send in, how much compute you have per transaction. So that was the main sort of challenge there, And then from there is really just, getting embedded into the industry and building the right abstractions on top. Composing, yeah.
That was great, thank you. What are some things, like, do you think we'll look back in 5 years and be like, I can't believe we did that publicly?
Right, interesting. I mean, I would say, except for maybe some kind of donations, I would be everything that we do right now on the blockchain would be like, maybe not ourselves, but maybe our descendants or mainstream users would be like, why are these people sort of publicly doing all this? This is clearly super dangerous, right? Where you even have high net worth individuals who sort of expose the whole financial history. And then imagine, like, and I think about this a lot because I give you one tangible example. So I was in Salt Lake City back, and it's called Mountain DAO. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's this famous sort of popular hacker house that there was in February. And Carl Samani, the managing partner of Multicoin, was there, and he was basically using a point of sale system that was sort of upgraded with Solana Pay. And he was using that to buy, I think it was a bottle of water. And I think 5 minutes after that, we had the first people from Mountain DAO like, oh, look at his like wallet balance. It has like, 20 million staked Sol or whatever. And so I think that's sort of the most tangible experience where like you're basically doxing yourself. If you do a couple of clicks, you actually put in some effort. So I think that was the most like in-your-face experience of, you shouldn't do those things publicly.
And as more stuff gets private, how do you think that affects the composability of the space?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'd like to get your thoughts about this as well, because I think just yesterday what we saw, I don't know if you followed this, but there was the Slope Wallet hack, supposedly Slope Wallet only, where they introduced some bug apparently where basically thousands of wallets were being drained. A couple of folks that I know also were drained. I don't know if you guys were affected in any way. I hope not. But essentially, how, and what was really astonishing was that the community sort of got together and was like tracing all the movement of funds and was, sort of trying to make sure, like, what's the root cause of this? And they were essentially able to do that because of the transparency of it all. So I was thinking to myself, okay, how do we ensure that we have the same level of accountability if we have most of transactions on Solana, but then also within the other layer ones be private? So that's a tough question. I still don't have the answer to it, but I'm confident that there is some middle ground where we can have accountability, sort of en masse, but also privacy in front of sort of the general public. So that's an interesting question. Like, how do you, and then it goes on and on and on. Like, how do you interact with Solana Explorer or other sort of, explorers? There's a bunch of them. This is going to be a tough question. Right now, the whole system is sort of based on transparency. And so every app, wallet, and other infrastructure providers are utilizing the transparency aspect of it. This is going to be a big change, a systemic change. But I'm really, really confident because, like, from the last months of talking to other projects, founders in the space, and really also great protocols, that they're really keen on privacy and that they understand the problem. And so I think it's going to be taking some time until we have sort of some really composable space that is really interoperable even with privacy. But I'm pretty sure we're going to get there.
Great, thank you.
So you mentioned, like, for example, what if yesterday's hack, every single thing would have just went to your protocol already, and we would lose all the ties and it just disappears into the ether because you lose track, right? Like, I think even though, like, it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel good to say it, I still think that there is there's an upside to having, for example, police be able to access historical data like this. Like, What do you think on that, of the dichotomy of, yeah, let's make sure that everything is for the general public not viewable, but then maybe if something that comes up, there would be some data that the police, for example, are able to follow up on, like forensic data? Like, yeah, what do you think about that going forward?
Very good question, and we talk about this a lot with our partners and investors as well. And there's obviously this one thing where as soon as you have control over the data, you have a lot of responsibility, because even if you act in your best interest or in your best effort, you could still be objectively wrong about something, and then data could be in the wrong hands, and so there's a lot of,
like slope.
This is a really tough question. What I can say, and what we are sort of, our stance as Light Protocol, is that we are always going to be compliant. So if there is, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be regulation, in some way, in the future, at least, we're always going to make sure that we're not facilitating illegal stuff. Is sort of in the sense that, whatever that regulation might look like. And I think there are a couple of different scenarios that might happen. Like, just today, I was talking to a wallet, and they sort of showed the possible scenario that we could have KYC'd non-custodial wallets in a year or two, right? So let's see how regulation, and I think it's like always, like, technology sort of front runs regulation a little bit, and I think we have to keep that in mind, especially in Germany. I think that's something that's highly misunderstood still, is that technology can front run regulation in the sense that it can actually impact regulation, and regulators sometimes use outdated measures to regulate, and so they'll have to catch up. So I think it's going to be a big challenge, and also like a tough sort of responsibility for us as a space, as Solana, to educate regulators. What that looks like specifically, I mean, one big shout out that I can give is, I think, if in a German space, Unstoppable Finance, so they're going to launch a wallet. Peter Groskopf, who's one of the CTO of one of the co-founders of Unstoppable Finance, he's actually actively talking at in Congress, and talking with decision makers and policy makers, and advocating for some sensible regulation. And so I think that's really exciting. Obviously, we make sure that privacy is compliant in that sense.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else got questions? Going for 1, going for 2, going for 3.
Cool.
So you mentioned ZK Cash. What do you think they got right, or what do you think they got wrong? Specifically, like Zuko and the original vision of it.
So the Zcash. Let's be careful not to say anything wrong. One of our advisors was at the Zcash board, but no, I love the Zcash people for sort of, they're just like, we would say giga brains, building sort of really frontier technology, and they're continuing to iterate on sort of zero knowledge in the privacy space. One thing that they've recently realized is that they've been working too far apart from the end user for a long time. And so now they're making some efforts to really sort of try to understand what users need, what is a good user experience. So I think they're going to churn out some really interesting stuff in the future, but I think that's like one thing that no solution so far has really nailed, and we're all looking for it. We're all looking for the product market fit that is like, how do you get this smooth user experience, right? We're all looking for that, and I think that's still sort of an open book. So.
That checkbox. There's like this is what I, for example, imagine of like, I go into my wallet, I click send, and there is a checkbox, send private or not private. Like, if we can arrive at that point, I think that's the mass adoption tipping point of send private. If that's clicked by default, oh, that's a game changer.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think. When do you think we could arrive at a point like that?
When?
When tick box?
By breakpoint, probably.
Ooh.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, that's sort of the Elon Musk-ish timelines, but yeah, I mean, we have all the ZK tag is there. Like, obviously, you can always iterate and optimize, but it's there. And now with Solana, we have sort of this unique field where we actually have a chain that really built the right abstractions for, I think, mainstream adoption. I think mainstream adoption is maybe a little out, like a couple of years. But checkbox or sort of default privacy, I'm very soon trademark.
Soon tick box. Good. Cool. Okay. If there's no more questions, then thank you very much, Swen, for the introduction of Light Protocol. We got one more. There he is. Didn't see you there.
Is there any document or white paper where you compare like how Light Protocol works in comparison to Zcash or Monero, like highlight the differences or so, details?
Short answer is no. We do have a light paper, and we called it light paper because of Light Protocol. I'm happy to share that in the group chat as well. But it's a Medium post that is much more focused around sort of the key questions of user experience. Tech-wise, we're using open source code, so I'll also happily refer to that. And then we're basically linking to the libraries that we use. So we didn't build the cryptography from scratch. There's like this famous, infamous saying, right? Like, never roll your own crypto, and that's for good reason. And so we're sort of standing on on the shoulders of giants here, Zcash especially, and then the ident-free team on Ethereum. So we're basically using Ethereum compliant, Ethereum-based tooling, made it run on Solana. Yep. So I'll happily refer to those for technical write-ups.
So these are like in form of crates, right? So you are using some crates which are implementing ZK Snark and.
So there's two parts, right? There's the client side and the program side, and then for the Rust, aka program side, we use it's called Arcworks. It's a pretty cool library that implements BN256. It's like this elliptic curve that also I think Tornado Nova uses. And then on the client side, we use tooling that is not Rust based, but it's NPM packages.
Okay, and I would also like to refer to the idea from the previous question about the idea of having like a checkbox in the wallet, whether to sync privately or not. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the huge challenge there would be like auto shielding the different amount of Solana that's about to be sent, because I think that if you like shield exactly the same amount which you are about to send, I think that's a huge leak, because like you could identify the transaction.
So very good point, very good thought. I think we have to understand the checkbox more as a metaphor, like the sort of simplicity of you don't really have to even think about it. So just think of like this default checkbox. And that's the sort of user experience we're going to enable. Technically, it'll look a bit different because of various reasons, and one you just mentioned. But yeah, all in due time. Good, sharp thought.
Thank you. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, sure. Rob.
Wait. You gotta record it.
Yeah, again on the metaphorical checkbox thing. It's like, if it is by breakpoint, would you? Because I noticed like the transaction time was quite long compared to that. Would that be able to come down a lot? Or?
Yep. We're planning to. So this is a little bit. This is based on a couple of factors, and I really can't go into sort of the details just yet, but in due time. Essentially, we'll bring down the cost and the cost of computation, which basically means that you can execute it in 1 or 2 transactions, and then, it's going to be much faster.
Awesome. Okay.
Yep.
That's it.
Cool. Thank you all for joining, and thanks for the great Q&A. And I'm sticking around for a little while after this, so happy to chat.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting this.
Hell yeah. What's the name?
Whatever you use most.